Today I'm doing a quick study just from imagination, painting a landscape. I've got a piece of Strathmore Mixed Media Paper taped off. I've reused my tape here, so you just have to let it dry for a while and then you can use it several times. I actually stick it onto a piece of coroplast or foam board, something where it doesn't all stick together. And I'm using a messy palette here with paint that I had left over from another painting. I'm just using a card, a points card actually. Some burnt sienna. I picked up two colors there, so I've got some optical mixing going on. So at this point I'm not really having much of a plan in my head, just using up paint that I have out and putting some down so I have something to respond to. If you start your paintings, especially with something other than a brush, you're going to have some looseness. I've switched here to a Catalyst wedge tool. I really like this tool for the ergonomics. It's a nice silicone blade, it's easy to clean, and you can use it also with cold wax and oil. I'm going to squeeze out some more cad red here. I like to use fluid paints in the beginning. At least I find that they're thin, even though they have a really saturated pigment load. Right now I'm using a Canadian brand called Demco. I buy it by the liter and decant it into small squeeze bottles that I buy at the dollar store. So I am painting from imagination here. I do not have a photo reference, so I'm kind of making up a landscape. I am mixing my greens from my palette, so using different blues and yellows. I'm working wet and wet, so you see some optical mixing going on here. Mixing right on the painting. I want these desaturated colors for the background, and in order to create those you want to add some of the opposite. So anytime you add the opposite color to your paint is going to desaturate it, and this is often how you also get muddy colors. So you don't want everything in your painting to be desaturated, but you want some things to be more neutralized because it makes the other saturated colors really pop. Desaturated colors also give depth and create distance in your landscapes. So I'm just trying to use up the paint on my palette at this point before I put out new paint or start a fresh palette. So this is starting to look a little murky and messy. The red underneath was wet, so you can see that coming through. Scraping on a quick sky here. This is phthalo blue with white added, of course. Trying to leave a little bit of that red showing through as well. Using a brush here, doing some negative painting, coming in, making these shapes look a little bit more tree-like. It's like a tree line in the distance. So you want to think of your painting as shapes and blocks of color. We're not painting in every leaf, every tree, every rock. Giving the essence of the landscape and letting the viewer figure out the details. So this is how to stay looser. So I'm just hit that area with a blow dryer to speed up the drying a bit, and I've put out a fresh palette now. I've got some ultramarine blue, some yellow oxide, a lemon yellow, and some cad red. So brushing in back over my previous sky here. So ultramarine has quite a bit of red in it, which makes it a warmer blue, although it always feels somewhat cool to me. But I'm thinking this will relate better to the red in my painting. Again, some negative painting in around these shapes to give it a bit of a tree line effect. I'm using a 1-inch brush here. It's a Crayola kids brush. I use these a lot. They're inexpensive and they last well, and if I forget to wash them out, it's not a big worry. So I'm putting in a little bit of water here with the ultramarine with a bit of white added. Adding some white in the sky, giving a couple of clouds. Now if you're having trouble blending the acrylic, it's drying fast, you can put in some glazing medium. Here I'm mixing up a new color. Trying to get something to look like some light coming in from behind. Adding a little bit more white in there. When you're mixing green, always add your blue to your yellow, because it doesn't take much blue to shift that color, as you saw, and then you can make a tint out of it by adding white. So this is not a desaturated green. It is absolutely pure. It is the ultramarine with the lemon yellow, or a primary yellow. I'm adding a little red for desaturation. So because I'm not using a photo reference, I am just responding to the painting, and I've painted enough landscapes to have a visual image in my mind, and this is what happens as you paint more and more. You will start to build up an inventory of imagery in your mind, and you can draw on that when you want to just paint and not worry about a photo. I encourage you to try it, even if you haven't painted a lot of landscapes. Try painting a landscape just from your imagination. You'll find that you can keep it much looser this way when you're not trying to copy from a picture and put in all the details. The one thing you want to make sure is that you do get value in your landscape, so pushing from very light to very dark, not just ending up in all the mid-tones, which is so easy to do, especially if you're working close. So I established some of my darks in my underpainting, and that's a good place to get your darks in so you don't forget about them. Work around the whole part of the whole painting. If you put some color in one place, add a little bit more to another. You can slightly change it by adding a little bit more of the blue or red into the green, depending on where you're putting it in your painting. It's good to have your more desaturated colors in the background to give the painting depth, and have your saturated colors closer to the foreground. Also, any details you put in, you'll want to put them closer to the front of your painting, to the bottom, rather than in the distance in most cases. That's going to give you quite a bit of perspective. I'm just putting in a few lighter areas here to give my tree line some depth. That's going to make some trees feel like they're further back and some are forward. Mixing up a dark here with the red and the blue, and adding a little bit of a line in under the tree. Now don't fret if you make a mistake. It can all be corrected. If you're working with acrylic, it doesn't take that long to dry, and you can go back in and change your color. If you're working with oil paint or cold wax and oil, you can scrape it off. So here I'm checking it with a working mat, and it's a good idea to have some working mats in your studio if you're working small and on paper, so that you can isolate it off and see it in a viewfinder. I'm using a bamboo skewer to do some mark making in the wet paint. Now you can see with a limited palette, I can mix a lot of colors and get a lot of variations. So with your greens, you might want to have blue greens and yellow greens. And here I've desaturated the blue for the pond. I've added a little bit of orange to the blue paint. So you could add a little bit of yellow and red as well, because those two colors make orange. I actually put a dab of orange out on my palette. Here I'm coming in with some yellow oxide. Adding some more layers here on top, bit of a desaturated color. Mixing a little bit of green, a tint, putting over this hill at the back. It seemed a little bit too yellow. Not sure if this color is quite right either. Checking with my working mat again. So it's really important to slow down when you're near the end to make your final adjustments to your painting. So I'm tweaking my green here again. Adding a little bit of green highlights in a few places. Closely, seeing where it needs some adjustments. I'm going to take the tape off now. See how it looks with a clean edge. So I recently painted a similar painting from a photograph, and I think that I have that imagery in my head, but I have changed it up here. So I got some bleed through on my tape. You can eliminate this by putting a bit of matte medium on your tape before you start. But there's the finished painting, a small study. You can work on these in half an hour or less and practice. That's what it's all about. Your painting practice. I hope you enjoyed that and you'll try it yourself.